Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from Afghanistan, where Chief Executive Abdullah has escaped an attack on a ceremony in Kabul, which was being attended by a number of politicians, including former President Hamid Karzai. Interior Ministry spokesperson Nusrat Rahimi says 18 people have been taken to hospital, while witnesses say there are multiple casualties. Heavy gunfire was heard during the ceremony to mark the 26th anniversary of the death of Hezb-e-Wahdat Party leader Abdul al-Mazari. Rahimi said the firing erupted from a construction site nearby. In a tweet, President Ashraf Ghani called the attack a crime against humanity and against the national unity of Afghanistan. The Taliban have denied responsibility and condemned the attack. Meanwhile, Taliban say they have killed 8 Afghan policemen in an attack on a security post in northern Balkh province. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says 7 others were wounded in the overnight attack in Nahr Shahi district. The fighters said they seized ammunition and weapons in the raid. Kabul has neither confirmed nor denied the claim. This is the second such attack by the Taliban after signing the Doha deal with the US last month. Ashraf Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah have announced to hold parallel swearing-in ceremonies as future president of the country. The Election Commission declared Ghani the winner of September 2019 polls 5 months after the elections amid accusations of electoral fraud. But Abdullah rejected the results, saying he has won the majority and will form an inclusive government. The Kabul government says preparations for President Ghani's oath-taking ceremony were completed and the event will be held on March 9th. Meanwhile, Abdullah's office says he will assume the role of president on the same day. The oath ceremony was scheduled for last month, but it got delayed after the US expressed concerns that the political turmoil may jeopardize their peace deal with the Taliban. Washington has backed Ghani's victory in the elections. For more on this, we are joined by Hamdullah Hamdard, analyst from Kabul, Afghanistan. Thank you for your time. Now, Mr. Hamdard, how will this power struggle between Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah impact the US-Taliban peace deal, especially after the apprehensions surrounding today's attack on the ceremony being attended by Abdullah?
I believe there will be no parallel government. Dr. Muhammad Ashraf Ghani will take oath on next Monday in the presidential palace of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And once he takes oath, then this game of election is completely over. Dr. Abdullah might become part of the Ashraf Ghani's government in the future, but he will not be sharing any power like he did in the National Unity Government. And this resistance is just for gaining some power in the next government so that he is not left out, because he has got like around 39% of the total votes that were eligible. So it's only a struggle for his entry in the next government, and there will be no other crisis. And I believe that once they both are in the government, that government is led by Ashraf Ghani, then the government will be able to make a coordinated delegation for the peace talks with the Afghan Taliban.
Now, Mr. Hamdard, in a latest development, Taliban say they have killed 8 Afghan policemen in an attack on security posts in the Nahr Shahi district of northern Balkh province today. With the Taliban attacks on Afghan security forces, do you see the Ghani administration going ahead with the prisoner exchange promised by Washington?
There is one point everybody should know. Taliban have agreed in the deal that they will release 1,000 Afghan security forces, whether they are our national army forces or police or any intelligence forces and etc. Taliban do not have 1,000 security forces in their presence with them. So they are attacking now. They're trying to complete that number of the military forces with them. At the moment, Taliban do not have 1,000 military forces in their presence. And that's the only reason, that's why they have increased their attacks on the national security forces of Afghanistan, to complete that 1,000 number. However, the Afghan government has more than 5,000 Talibans in their presence, and this exchange is not implementable at the moment.
Exchange not implementable at the moment. That was Hamdullah Hamdard, analyst from Kabul, Afghanistan. Thank you for your time. Now, moving on to the US, which says it is encouraged by an agreement on a ceasefire reached between Moscow and Ankara. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkey's Tayyip Erdogan agreed on a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib after a 6-hour meeting in Moscow. The State Department said the US is hopeful that the truce will help de-escalate tensions in Syria's Idlib. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has also expressed hope that the latest ceasefire will end fighting across Syria. After the meeting in Moscow yesterday, Erdogan said both Turkey and Russia will work to make the ceasefire in Idlib a lasting one. Erdogan said the two countries will ensure aid reaches the Syrians in need. Putin said he has agreed to continue working with Turkey on Syria as per the Astana format.
As a result of our negotiations, we have agreed on a joint document which will be read by the foreign ministers. It includes the solutions which I and the Turkish President Mr. Erdogan developed during today's consultations, which lasted for over 6 hours.
Moving to Syria, whose President Bashar al-Assad says the U.S. Middle East peace plan, the so-called deal of the century, is a stillborn plan. In an interview, al-Assad said Washington's Middle East proposition was made only in time for the next U.S. elections. The Syrian president said those elections will be held at the end of this year, so the idea is meaningless. Assad pointed out that states and governments, even those allied with America and Israel, have rejected the plan. Speaking on Syria, Assad said several foreign companies have found ways to invest in Damascus despite Western sanctions. In India, the Uttar Pradesh police have put up several pictures of the anti-citizenship law protesters across Lucknow city. Risking their safety, UP police also unveiled names and residential addresses on the billboards. Police allege individuals identified on the signposts incited violence in the city. Many of the accused mentioned in the hoardings were earlier granted bail by a local court. Parts of India, including the capital New Delhi, have seen violent protests over the citizenship law, which discriminates against Muslim minorities. 47 protesters were killed during last week's riots in Delhi. In Bangladesh, around 12 people have been wounded in a protest against the upcoming visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Police say 4 cops were wounded from a clash with protesters in the southern island of Hatia. Hundreds of protesters on the remote island blocked a busy road and chanted slogans against the Modi government, which is viewed as anti-Muslim. Police baton charged the protesters, who retaliated with brick, bats and stones. Modi is due in Bangladesh on March 17th. Dhaka government has come under criticism for sending an invitation to Modi. Opposition parties have strongly condemned the recent killings in Delhi during communal riots. Moving on to China, where for the first time, no cases of new coronavirus have been reported in Hubei province, outside the capital of Wuhan, where the disease originated. China's National Health Commission says all 126 new cases in the province were in Wuhan. Elsewhere in the world, the fatalities continue. More in this report.
The new coronavirus has infected over 97,000 people in more than 80 countries. In China, 143 new cases have been reported, with 30 new deaths, taking the total to 3,042. Britain and Switzerland reported their first deaths from the outbreak, while Bosnia and South Africa confirmed their first cases. The World Health Organization has warned that several countries are not doing enough to fight the outbreak.
We are concerned that some countries have either not taken this seriously enough or have decided there is nothing they can do. We are concerned that in some countries, the level of political commitment and the actions that demonstrate that commitment do not match the level of the threat we all face. This is not a drill.
Saudi Arabia has reopened the Great Mosque in Mecca after it was closed for sterilization. The kingdom also suspended the year-round Umrah pilgrimage. Meanwhile, Salvador's health workers are applying disinfectant at the international airport in an effort to head off the novel coronavirus.
This liquid is to be applied as protection against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and certain elements that may at some point generate complications. It is also important to emphasize that it is effective against coronavirus.
Canada has announced 9 new cases, bringing the national total to 45. In the US, Congress has voted for an $8.3 billion emergency funding package to fight the coronavirus as the death toll rises to 12.
Saudi Arabia has slammed Iran for granting Saudi citizens entry amid the coronavirus outbreak. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry urged Tehran to reveal the identities of all Saudi nationals who had visited since the start of February. Citing an official source, the statement accused Iran of allowing Saudi citizens entry to its territories without stamping their passports. It says Iran acted irresponsibly, which makes tackling virtually impossible. The ministry said the citizens will be subjected to law forbidding travel to Iran if they do not declare their visits in 48 hours. Saudi Arabia has reported 5 cases of the COVID-19. 4 of them were citizens who had recently visited Iran. The City of London Corporation has revoked an honour granted to Aung San Suu Kyi over the treatment of minority Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Elected representatives on the body running London's historic centre and financial district voted to revoke the freedom of the city granted to Suu Kyi 3 years ago. Officials said the decision reflects the city corporation's condemnation of humanitarian abuses in Myanmar. The move comes after Suu Kyi's appearance at the International Court of Justice in The Hague in December. Suu Kyi defended Myanmar at the highest UN court against allegations of rape, arson, and mass killings of Rohingya Muslims. In January, the ICJ ordered Myanmar to prevent the genocide of Rohingya people in Rakhine. The EU says serious differences remain between the bloc and the UK after the conclusion of the first round of trade talks. The bloc's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said difficult issues have to be resolved, but a good agreement for both sides is still possible. He said competition rules, police cooperation, and deal enforcement remain contentious. Brussels insists on keeping EU standards as a reference point in the trade agreement, but London calls it a dynamic alignment by another name. Both sides set out their respective positions in opposing strategy documents last month.
In this first round, the British tell us that they always have this ambition of a high standard as we have it ourselves, but there are 2 difficulties. The British do not want to translate these commitments into a joint agreement, nor do they want appropriate mechanisms to ensure respect of it on both sides.
Talks moved to London later this month for the second round. Now moving to U.S. presidential elections, Senator Elizabeth Warren has ended her presidential campaign after a poor showing on Super Tuesday. The Massachusetts senator was a favorite of the liberal left and had been a front-runner in the Democratic field. The contest is now seen as a 2-horse race between former Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Warren said she needed some time to reflect on who to support. With her departure, a Democratic race that began with a record number of female candidates is now left with 2 male frontrunners. Senator Warren called her supporters to highlight what the campaign had already accomplished. A Virgin Media database breach has affected 900,000 people as the data was left unsecured and accessible online for 10 months. The company says the breach was not due to a hack or a criminal attack, but because the database was incorrectly configured. It said the data did not include any passwords or financial details. The firm was alerted to the problem after it was spotted by an independent security researcher. Virgin Media's chief executive, Lutz Kohler, said the company immediately solved the issue by shutting down access. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has accused the opposition of trying to destabilize the country, calling it unacceptable. At a meeting with the leaders of Russia's Federal Assembly, Putin said the government needs to guarantee that the country develops further. The president said Russia should return to the 1990s and efforts should be made to stabilize the government. He said many members of the assembly witnessed the events of the 1990s and he hopes nothing like that will happen in Russia. In the 1990s, Russia went through an enormous economic, social and political shock. The state attempted to rapidly adjust to the global economy after the end of the Soviet Union. In India, 13 people have been killed after a car rammed into an SUV on a highway near the southwestern district of Tumakuru. Police say 5 others were injured in the accident, which happened when the driver lost control. Officials say the car was approaching on the wrong side of the highway. They said people traveling in the SUV were from Hosur in Tamil Nadu. Police say they have opened an investigation. In the Gaza Strip, 10 people have been killed and 60 others injured in a bakery fire that engulfed a crowded market in a refugee camp. In a statement, the Palestinian Health Ministry said 4 children and 3 women were among the dead. Witnesses say they heard an explosion in a bakery in the Nusayrat camp in the central Gaza. They said the blaze quickly spread to nearby stores, factories and cars parked along the street. Israel maintains a blockade of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian enclave is home to 2 million people. Indigenous people make up to 2% of Argentina's population of 43 million. They are limited to far-flung areas of the country where water pollution, unhygienic conditions and malnutrition are killing indigenous children. Let's look at the situation in this report.
Argentina has around 18 different indigenous groups who remain invisible in mainstream society. Most live in remote parts of the country where they are deprived of life's basic necessities. This includes the Wichi community, who suffer from lack of clean water, availability of food and pollution. 8 of its children have died within the last month. Local hospital beds are filled with children battling malnutrition and other health issues. Hospital authorities say malnutrition is not the only issue. The children are also suffering from diarrhea.
There are children that have problems. They have diarrhea, they vomit and lose weight. There are times that they are taken to Tartagal and recover there, but when they return, the problem returns because of the water. This is not safe water.
The community also has one of the highest rates of infant mortality in the country.
The place they use as a water source is already either contaminated or has high standards of salinization or even chemical products from the extraction site at very shallow depths, or because they store the water in containers that have been used before for chemicals associated with agriculture, which cause them to have many gastrointestinal diseases, diarrhea, malnutrition, and above all, dehydration.
Indigenous people face an appalling plight all over Argentina.
The situation is a disaster on all levels. Education, health, access to jobs, access to water, life expectancy, infant mortality, malnutrition, everything. There is no good news. What can be done? There is no long-term plan, not a short-term plan, which is what constantly happens.
The country is also struggling with the financial depression. Inflation hovers at above 50% and the poverty rate is currently at 35.4%. The country's indigenous communities, who have been economically vulnerable historically, have been especially hard hit.
In Mexico, conflict fueled by the drug trade has left tens of thousands of people in secret, unmarked graves. The families of these missing persons say the authorities have taken little action over the issue. One group of activists has turned to drone technology to address the problem themselves. More in this report.
Mexico is one of the most violent countries in the world. Since 2006, an escalating drug war between rival cartels has resulted in the deaths of over 115,000 people, as well as the disappearance of at least 60,000 others, most of whom end up in unmarked graves.
These are places where members of organized crime groups hid bodies of kidnapped and murdered people. Normally, we come to these places to search and locate human remains.
Desperate for closure, one group of parents affected by this tragedy are using drones to find as many of these graves as they can. They say northern Mexico has seen so much carnage over the years, its entire landscape is changing because of these mass burial sites.
Y podemos observar
We compare drawn images with photographs from previous years and we can see the differences in the land today. Discoloration changes in the earth, constructions, mounds of stones or dirt.
construcciones.
This is a dangerous job. Not only do these people risk drawing the wrath of ruthless drug cartels, but also the Mexican police and military, who have often used extrajudicial methods in the country's long war on drugs. Most tragically of all, none of this has been able to put a dent in the growing power of these criminal groups.
European markets have fallen sharply as the coronavirus outbreak continues to rattle global economic activity. Frankfurt's DAX and CAC 40 in Paris have lost over 2% each. London's FTSE 100 is trading nearly 2% lower after capital stocks slid 8%. The Cineworld shares also fell about 7.5%. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the losses, closing over 2.5% after shares of index heavyweight SoftBank Group plunged over 6%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost over 2% after China Eastern Airlines slipped about 4%. Seoul's Kospi also lost over 2% after airline ANA Holdings fell nearly 4%. Shanghai Composite lost over 1%. Meanwhile, international Brent crude oil price has lost nearly 2% over fears of dampening global demand. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.